I remember the sting before I even felt the pain. My father's hand cracked across my cheek so hard that the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth instantly. My lower lip split open and I staggered back against the old wooden cabinet in the living room. I lifted my hand to my face, seeing the smear of red across my fingertips. My mother's voice followed immediately, sharp and relentless, cutting through the ringing in my ears. "Sign it, Olivia. Do it for your sister." Her tone was not pleading. It was a command, a demand. My father loomed closer, his face twisted with frustration and rage. He had never struck me like this as an adult. When I was a child, harsh words and intimidation had been enough. But now, standing in my parents' living room at 32 years old, refusing to bend to their will, they resorted to violence as if it were the only language they trusted to break me. I straightened my spine, tasting the salt of my own blood, and shook my head slowly. "No, this house is mine. Grandpa left it to me. You have no right." My voice was low but firm. I could feel my chest pounding, adrenaline pumping through my veins, but there was a steadiness in me, too. The lake house was not just a piece of property. It was my inheritance, my sanctuary, the only tangible connection to the one man who had ever made me feel valued in this family. The papers sat on the coffee table spread out like a trap. Legal documents thick and intimidating waiting for my signature. My father jabbed his finger down at the line with my name typed beneath it. "Do it now, Olivia." "You are being selfish," my mother hissed. "Think of your sister. Vanessa's wedding is only weeks away. She needs this. She deserves this." I stared at the line, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. My parents were asking me to give up the most precious gift I had ever received for a party that would last one day. When I remained motionless, my father's hand came down again, another slap that snapped my head sideways. I gasped, my cheek, burning my ears, ringing once more. My mother stood over me, her eyes cold. "If you truly loved this family, you would do it. Vanessa has always been the one to carry our hopes. You should support her, not stand in her way." Rage bubbled in my chest, mingling with despair. I wiped my lip again and spoke through the pain. "No, I will never sign." Something in my defiance must have registered because my father's jaw tightened and his hand paused mid-air. But in that hesitation, in that silence, I realized the battle was already lost in their minds. They did not need my agreement. They would find another way. And they did. Days later, I discovered what they had done. My signature, or rather an imitation of it, appeared on the documents filed with the county. The lake house had been sold. Sold behind my back against my will for hundreds of thousands less than its worth. They had taken it. They had stolen the only piece of me that belonged solely to me. They had erased Grandpa's wishes with the stroke of a forged pen. I could hardly breathe when I held the evidence in my hands. It felt as though the ground had split beneath me, dropping me into a pit I might never escape. Yet the humiliation was not complete until the wedding day. In a grand ballroom filled with glittering chandeliers and laughing guests, my parents raised their champagne glasses. My mother smiled with the satisfaction of a queen, my father with the pride of a man who believed he had won. And with all eyes on them, they declared, "Thanks for the wedding present, Olivia." The room erupted in laughter and applause as if my sacrifice had been a generous act of love. I stood frozen. Every face turned toward me, the air thick with judgment and misunderstanding. My heart pounded, but I forced a smile. A cold, deliberate smile. I lifted my own glass just enough to be seen and replied softly, "Check your mail tomorrow." Their laughter faltered, their faces froze. In that single moment, they had no idea what storm was about to crash down on them. My name is Olivia Carter. I am 32 years old and I live in Boston, where I run my own small but successful architecture firm. I have built my life brick by brick through long nights, unpaid internships, and the kind of persistence most people in my family never believed I had. To the outside world, I am a professional woman who designs homes that bring peace and beauty into other people's lives. To my parents, I have always been the quiet one, the one who did not demand attention, the one who could be ignored without consequence. But the lake house was different. That place was mine. It was not just a building on 3 acres of waterfront. It was a promise from my grandfather Samuel that someone in this family saw me, valued me, and trusted me. I can still see his weathered hands guiding mine as I held a fishing rod at the edge of the dock, his voice telling me that hard work and honesty mattered more than anything. While my parents and my younger sister Vanessa were dazzled by status and appearances, Grandpa Samuel taught me how to repair a broken chair, how to split wood for the fireplace, and how to sit in silence by the water and find strength in solitude. The lake house was his legacy, a legacy he entrusted to me, not to my parents, and certainly not to my sister. And yet, that is exactly what they took. They did not just sell a property, they stole a lifetime of memories and a future I had planned. They slapped me until I bled, they forged my name, and then they laughed in front of hundreds of people as if it were all a joke. That is why I need to tell this story. Before I go any further, let me pause for a moment. I want to know where you are watching from. Are you listening in a small town like the one where my grandfather built his house, or from a busy city where family dramas play out behind closed doors? Drop your location in the comments. And if you believe, like I do, that betrayal from family is one of the deepest wounds a person can suffer, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories where victims of family cruelty find their strength and take back what is theirs. Because this is not just a story about a house. It is not even just about money. This is about toxic family patterns, about favoritism that corrodes the soul of a child, about control that crosses into abuse, and about the courage it takes to resist even when the people hurting you are the very ones who were supposed to protect you. This story is about me, yes, but it is also about anyone who has ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of appearances, anyone who has ever been forced to sacrifice so someone else could shine. If you have lived through that, then you already know what it means to stand on the edge of losing everything and still decide to fight. This is my fight, and it is only just beginning. When I look back at my childhood, the imbalance was always there, like a shadow stretching across every memory. My younger sister Vanessa was born when I was 4, and from the moment she opened her eyes, my parents seemed to decide that she would be the star, and I would be the supporting role. Vanessa was called the pretty one, the charming one, the girl who would capture attention in any room. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the girl who should not expect too much. At first, as a child, I accepted it. I thought every family had favorites. But as the years passed, the difference grew so sharp that it shaped the very core of who I became. I remember asking once to attend a summer architecture camp when I was 15. I had saved half the money already from babysitting jobs. My parents looked at me with tired eyes and told me there was no money to spare. They suggested I spend the summer helping more around the house. 2 weeks later, Vanessa announced she wanted ballet lessons because her best friend had just enrolled. Within days, she had new shoes, a tutu, and classes booked at the most expensive studio in town. That contrast was not an exception. It was the rule. Vanessa crashed her first car 3 months after getting her license. My father bought her a new one before the week was over. I had to work 2 part-time jobs in college just to afford my textbooks. Vanessa wanted to study abroad for a semester, and my parents dipped into their savings to make it happen. When I needed dental surgery, they told me to wait until I had a job with good insurance. When Vanessa wanted a shopping spree for prom, my mother handed over her credit card. These moments were not just unfair. They carved deep scars, teaching me that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I would always be second to Vanessa. Yet somehow I survived. I found strength in independence. I learned not to ask. I became self-reliant in ways my sister never had to be. And through it all, there was one person who reminded me that I mattered, Grandpa Samuel. My grandfather was a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands and his heart. He saw in me something my parents refused to acknowledge. He would take me to the lake house on weekends, and while Vanessa grew bored after a day, I would stay for weeks if I could. We fished off the dock at dawn, watching the mist rise from the water. He taught me how to paddle a canoe and how to sand a piece of wood until it was smooth enough to shine. He would tell me stories of his childhood of working hard to build everything he had. His words settled into me like seeds, planting values that later became the foundation of my life. At the lake house, I was not the forgotten daughter. I was not the second best. I was simply Olivia, and that was enough. My parents noticed this bond, and I believe it made them uneasy. My mother would sigh whenever I asked to visit Grandpa, claiming I should spend more time at home. My father often dismissed my stories from the lake as unimportant. Vanessa would roll her eyes and call the lake house boring, insisting that real life was in the city where she could shop and socialize. But I never cared. The lake house was more than walls and wood. It was freedom. It was the one place where favoritism could not touch me. I remember one particular summer when I was 17. Vanessa had convinced my parents to pay for a modeling program that promised to open doors in the fashion industry. She spent her summer posing for photos and attending parties. I spent mine at the lake house working with Grandpa on repairing the old boat shed. At the end of that summer, Vanessa returned with stories of glamour and complaints about how hard her life was. I returned with calloused hands, a sense of accomplishment, and the warmth of having been truly seen. That contrast never left me. When I graduated from high school, my parents barely noticed, too busy preparing for one of Vanessa's pageants. Grandpa was the one who hugged me tight and whispered that he was proud. When I got into college for architecture, my parents expressed mild surprise as though they had not expected me to succeed. Vanessa, meanwhile, was celebrated for every minor achievement. Even her failures were softened, excused, or spun into charming anecdotes. She quit jobs, dropped out of classes, walked away from responsibilities, and still, my parents clapped for her as though she had performed on stage. I cannot count the number of times I lay awake at night wondering why I was not enough for them, why my steady efforts were invisible while Vanessa's chaos was rewarded. Those questions never received answers. Instead, I learned to stop asking. Yet in that silence, resentment grew. It was the kind of resentment that settles deep, quiet, but powerful, waiting for the day when the scales tip too far. And though I did not know it then, the lake house would one day be the very thing that tipped those scales. It was Grandpa's gift to me, his acknowledgement that he saw the difference, that he knew who truly valued what he had built. That house was proof that I mattered, and in my parents' eyes, it became proof that I had taken something they believed should belong to Vanessa. Looking back, I can see how this favoritism and neglect shaped every choice they made. They trained Vanessa to expect the world to serve her, and they trained me to accept being forgotten. It was a cruel balance that seemed sustainable only until something of real value was at stake. When the lake house entered the picture, the cracks widened into chasms. My parents' favoritism was no longer about small indulgences or everyday choices. It became about legacy money and power, and they were willing to cross any line, even lines drawn in blood, to keep Vanessa on her throne. The day Grandpa Samuel passed away was one of the hardest of my life. He had been my anchor, the one person who never treated me as less than, and losing him felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. After the funeral, our family gathered in the office of his attorney for the reading of the will. I sat in the corner, still numb with grief, while my parents and Vanessa whispered to each other in anxious tones. They expected the lake house to be divided or sold, the money split evenly, or perhaps redirected to them. But when the attorney cleared his throat and read the words aloud, my world shifted. To my granddaughter Olivia, who appreciates the value of hard work and solitude, I leave my lake house and all its contents in the hope that she will find the same peace there that I did. My eyes blurred as tears filled them, but this time it was not sorrow. It was gratitude. It was validation. It was love reaching out from beyond the grave. For once in my life, someone had chosen me. Across the table, my mother's smile faltered brittle and thin. My father's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with calculation. Vanessa gasped audibly and leaned forward in her chair. What, why her, I deserve it too. She spent more time there than I did, my father muttered, as if searching for any reason to undo what had just been spoken. The attorney continued reading, but the mood in the room had shifted entirely. I caught my mother's eyes, and though her lips curved upward in a semblance of congratulations, the coldness there told me everything. To them, this was not a gift of love. It was theft. It was me taking what belonged to their golden child. Vanessa did not even try to hide her bitterness. That property is worth a fortune now. Why would he leave it all to you? She demanded. I did not answer. The truth was obvious. She had never cared for the lake house, not the summers by the water, Not the long afternoons fixing things, not the quiet peace that came with it. She had always been restless there, begging to go back to town. The lake house was mine in spirit long before it became mine on paper, but my parents' resentment grew quietly after that day. I could feel it in every conversation, in every look. They rarely mentioned the lake house, but when they did, it was with clipped tones and eyes that refused to meet mine. Vanessa, meanwhile, acted as if it was an insult she could not forgive. Every time she glanced at me, it was there that sense of betrayal, as if Grandpa had cheated her by acknowledging my worth. The truth was, she had been cheated of nothing. She still had our parents' undying devotion, their wallets open for her every whim. Yet that was not enough. It never was. For my parents, the lake house became a symbol of what they could not control. A reminder that someone outside their influence had seen me, valued me, and left me something permanent. They could not accept it. Instead, their smiles grew tighter, their remarks sharper, and their eyes colder. I had taken in their minds not just a house, but power. In the years that followed, I visited the lake house often, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. I restored pieces that had fallen into disrepair, painted the shutters, refinished the dock. Each nail, hammered each board, sanded was a reaffirmation that it belonged to me. And each time when I mentioned my visits, my parents' lips pursed in disapproval. Vanessa once told me, dripping with sarcasm, "You must think you are so special now that you have Grandpa's little cabin." I smiled and did not answer, but her words carried venom. She saw the lake house as money, as prestige, as a resource wasted on me. She could not see the truth that it was never about wealth. It was about belonging. The resentment festered like rot in the foundation of our family, and I should have known deep down that one day it would all explode. The signs began subtly, like cracks in a wall you almost do not notice until the structure is about to collapse. At first, it was small things. When I drove up to the lake house one spring to do routine maintenance, I discovered that Ted Johnson, the caretaker who had looked after the property for years, was suddenly unreachable. His phone went straight to voicemail. When I asked my father about him during dinner one Sunday, he barely looked up from his plate and muttered, "He retired." That struck me as odd because only 2 months earlier, Ted had told me he was planning to keep working through the summer. The answer felt rehearsed, as though my father had prepared it in advance. Then I noticed pictures in my parents' house disappearing. Old family photos that had the lake house in the background, ones that showed me and Grandpa together, had been quietly taken off the walls. When I asked about them, my mother smiled thinly and said they were being reframed. The excuse rang hollow. Around the same time, Vanessa suddenly began flashing new wealth. A diamond bracelet glittered on her wrist at a family dinner. When I asked where it came from, she tossed her hair and said it was an early wedding gift from Mom and Dad. A week later, she showed off pictures of a honeymoon she and James had booked in Bali and the Maldives, complete with private villas. Another week passed and she drove up in a brand new BMW, her old car discarded like last season's fashion. The spending was obscene, even by her standards. Where was the money coming from? I wondered aloud to my friend Rachel over coffee. She frowned and suggested maybe James's family was contributing since they had money. The explanation made sense on the surface, but something inside me refused to settle. My unease deepened when I received a strange call from Dorothy, the elderly neighbor whose property bordered the lake house. "Audrey, dear, will you still be visiting after the sale?" she asked innocently. My heart skipped. "What sale?" There was a long pause before she stammered, "Oh, my." Perhaps I spoke out of turn. "You should ask your parents." She quickly ended this call, leaving me with a racing heart and a sinking stomach. I could not sleep that night. My mind circled the possibilities. Had my parents rented out the lake house behind my back? Had they taken a loan against it? The worst-case scenario, selling it, felt too terrible to believe. But doubts gnawed at me. I decided to confront them directly. One Saturday, I drove to their house determined to get answers. The moment I walked in, I sensed tension. Papers were scattered on the coffee table, and my parents exchanged startled glances when they saw me. "What is this?" I asked, moving closer. My mother tried to block my view, but I caught sight of the words, "purchase agreement," across the top of a document. My blood ran cold. "Sit down, Olivia," my father ordered. His tone was sharp and patient, as if I were the child he could still command into silence. I shook my head. "Tell me what is going on." My mother's voice turned syrupy, almost condescending. "Darling, you know your sister's wedding is coming. It is important for her to have the day she deserves. We need you to sign these papers." She pushed the documents toward me, her hand shaking only slightly. I glanced down and felt sick. It was a deed transfer. They wanted me to sign away the lake house. My knees weakened, but I steadied myself. "No, absolutely not. Grandpa left that house to me. It is not yours to take." My father's face darkened. "Do not be foolish. This is for your sister. She only gets married once. We have already promised the money." I lifted my chin. "Then you promised something you had no right to give." My refusal hung in the air, heavy and defiant. My mother's eyes narrowed, her smile vanished. "If you loved this family, you would do this. Do not be selfish, Olivia. Vanessa needs you." The pressure in the room mounted until my father snapped. In one swift movement, his hand struck my face so hard I stumbled backward. Pain radiated from my cheek, hot and shocking. Before I could recover, he hit me again. My lips split open, blood seeping down my chin. "Sign it," he roared. My mother stood over me, her eyes cold and merciless. "Do it now." I pressed my hand to my mouth, tasting blood, and shook my head. "No." My voice was hoarse, but it carried. "You cannot force me. You will never force me." Rage flashed in my father's eyes. For a moment, I thought he might strike me again. But then he froze, chest heaving, jaw clenched. My mother quickly gathered the papers, her expression unreadable. "Fine," she said at last. "Have it your way." I knew then that they would not give up. If they could not break me with violence, they would find another path. And days later, I discovered they had. A letter from the county records office arrived in my mailbox confirming the sale of the lake house. My signature was on the documents, or at least a crude imitation of it. They had gone ahead without me. They had forged my name, stolen my inheritance, and sold the lake house for a fraction of its worth. The shock was a physical blow. I collapsed into a chair, clutching the papers with trembling hands. They had not only struck me until I bled, they had erased my voice entirely. They had stolen the one place that was mine, the one connection to Grandpa Samuel, the one reminder that I mattered. And they had done it with forged ink and shameless greed. The day I drove up to the lake house to see for myself remains etched into my memory like a nightmare on repeat. It was early morning, the sky overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than ever, my knuckles white as the Boston skyline disappeared behind me and the highway stretched ahead. The 3-hour drive felt longer than it ever had before. My thoughts chased each other in frantic circles. Maybe it was all a mistake. Maybe the letter was wrong. Maybe my parents had not actually gone through with it. With every mile hope warred with dread, each heartbeat louder than the last. But when I finally turned onto the familiar gravel road that led to the property, my heart plummeted. The old wooden sign that read "Samuel's Rest" had been taken down. The driveway, once quiet and overgrown with pine needles, was filled with tire tracks, and parked in front of the cabin was a large moving truck. My stomach turned. I slammed the car into park and stepped out, my legs trembling. Strangers were carrying boxes out of the house, loading them onto the truck. A middle-aged couple stood nearby, directing the movers. The woman noticed me first and smiled politely. "Oh, hello, are you from the neighborhood?" she asked warmly. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "No, this is my house. I am Olivia Carter. This property belongs to me." The couple exchanged startled glances before the man stepped forward, a folder in his hand. "I am Robert Johnson, and this is my wife, Linda. We purchased this property 3 weeks ago. We closed last Friday." "That is impossible," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I never sold this house." He frowned and handed me the folder. Inside were the sale documents complete with my parents' signatures, and most damning of all, my own. Or rather, a forgery. My knees buckled, and for a moment I thought I might collapse on the spot. "That is not my signature. I never agreed to this." Linda's expression softened, horror dawning in her eyes. We had no idea. We thought it was all legitimate. We already sold our home to move here. I handed the papers back with trembling fingers, my vision blurred with tears. I stumbled back to my car, forcing myself to hold it together until I was safely inside. Once the door closed, I broke. My body shook with sobs, the betrayal too vast to contain. Through the windshield, I saw Robert and Linda speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward me with pity. I did not care. The only thing I could think was that my parents had truly done it. They had taken my grandfather's gift, my sanctuary, my proof of worth, and sold it as if it were theirs to give away. When I finally found the strength to start the engine, I drove straight to the county records office. There, the clerk confirmed everything. The lake house had been sold for $375,000, far below its market value. The buyers had paid in cash, and the sale date matched perfectly with the sudden shopping sprees, the lavish engagement parties, and the extravagant wedding plans my sister had flaunted. My parents had not only stolen from me, they had robbed me in broad daylight and funneled it into Vanessa's fantasy. Leaving the records office, my phone buzzed with a call from Dorothy. Her voice was hesitant but filled with guilt. "Olivia, I overheard your parents at the general store weeks ago. They were talking about needing to sell the lake house before you found out. I thought you had agreed to it, and now I realize how wrong I was. I am so sorry." The words tightened the knot in my chest, but also lit a fire in me. They had not just betrayed me, they had plotted it, planned it, and laughed about it. As I hung up, my tears dried into something sharper. Grief hardened into resolve. I would not let them destroy me. They had stolen my house, they had struck me until I bled, but I would fight back. Not just with anger, but with the truth, with evidence, and with every ounce of strength I had left. This was no longer just about a property. This was about justice, and I intended to make them face it. The night after visiting the county office, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the documents I had collected. My hands still shook when I touched the forged deed. The false notary stamped the confirmation that everything I feared had come true. But amidst the despair, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could not simply let this pass. My parents had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the only way forward was to fight. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted to guide me through such a nightmare. Rachel Myers had been my closest friend since college and now worked as a real estate attorney. When she answered the phone and heard the tremor in my voice, she insisted I come to her office immediately. I laid everything out in front of her, each piece of evidence like a wound reopened. Rachel studied the documents, her brows knitting tighter with every page. "Olivia, this is fraud plain and simple. Forgery, theft, the works. They had no legal right to sell the lake house without your consent." My chest tightened. "Can it be reversed?" She leaned back in her chair, nodding slowly. "Yes, but it will take time. We will need to collect evidence file for an injunction and prepare for a messy legal battle. The good news is your case is strong. The bad news is your parents may face criminal charges if the district attorney gets involved." The thought of my parents in handcuffs twisted my stomach, but Rachel's calm certainty steadied me. She began listing steps. We needed witness statements. We needed bank records that proved the money from the sale went directly into funding Vanessa's wedding. We needed to track down the notary whose stamp appeared on the documents to confirm the fraud. I nodded, feeling determination rise where despair had been. Over the next days, I became a collector of truths. Dorothy provided a written statement about overhearing my parents at the general store. Rachel pulled financial records showing deposits into my parents' account, followed immediately by massive withdrawals that matched Vanessa's wedding expenses. I even tracked down the notary whose seal was on the deed. She confirmed she had never notarized those documents and agreed to sign an affidavit declaring her stamp had been misused. Piece by piece, the puzzle of their betrayal came together. Still, Rachel advised caution. We could have filed immediately, brought everything crashing down before the wedding, but she urged me to consider the strategy. "If you reveal this now," she explained, "they will spin it. They will paint you as bitter, as jealous of your sister. You will be accused of trying to ruin her wedding. No one will focus on what they did. They will only see you as the villain." Her words rang true. I could already imagine my mother weeping to relatives about how I hated Vanessa, how I chose this moment to lash out. The thought sickened me, but it also clarified my decision. No, I said firmly. We wait. We let them have their wedding, let them bask in their illusion of triumph. And then, the morning after, we drop everything. Rachel studied me for a long moment before nodding. Cold but fair, she said. It will make the impact undeniable. My plan solidified that night as I sat at my desk drafting a letter to my parents. I poured every ounce of pain and betrayal onto the page. I told them what the lake house meant to me, how it was the last connection to Grandpa Samuel, how they had not just taken property but desecrated trust. I reminded them of the slaps, the blood, the humiliation, and I told them that justice was coming. It would not be in a public screaming match, but in the calm weight of evidence they could not escape. When the wedding was over, when they believed they had won, that was when I would strike. I sealed the letter and set it aside, knowing it would be delivered at exactly the right moment. In the weeks that followed, I played my role. I attended bridal showers, rehearsals, dinners, all with a frozen smile on my face. Every text from my mother about flowers, every phone call from Vanessa about seating charts, every smug remark from my father about costs was another log thrown onto the fire burning inside me. Outwardly, I was the dutiful sister and daughter. Inwardly, I was a soldier sharpening my blade. They thought I was beaten, that they had silenced me with forged ink and bruised skin. They had no idea that I was waiting patient and precise for the moment they least expected. The wedding day arrived like a storm dressed in silk and gold. From the moment I stepped into the Grand Hotel ballroom, I felt the weight of extravagance pressing down on me. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Orchids draped every table, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Guests floated in with glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos, whispering about how this was the event of the year. I walked in wearing the pale pink bridesmaid dress. Vanessa had chosen the fabric stiff and suffocating like armor disguised as chiffon. Vanessa herself was radiant in a custom French gown that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She glowed not with love, but with the satisfaction of being the center of a spectacle. James stood beside her, handsome and polished, smiling, as though he had built this dream with his own hands instead of with stolen money. I forced my lips into a polite smile, but my stomach churned with every step. The ceremony was held at the ornate church, first complete with imported flowers, a professional opera singer, and vows crafted to sound like poetry. The audience sighed at every line, and my parents beamed from the front row, their pride not in the marriage itself but in the illusion of wealth and success they had manufactured. I played my part, holding Vanessa's bouquet, adjusting her train, smiling for photographs. Inside, I felt nothing but ice. After the ceremony, we were whisked away to the reception. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. Ice sculptures glistened under spotlights. Champagne fountains bubbled in the corners. A 10-piece band played atop a custom-built stage. Tables were set with crystal glasses and monogrammed napkins, each centerpiece a tower of orchids and roses. The air smelled of wealth, but to me it stank of theft. Dinner was served, and guests marveled at the Wagyu beef, the butter-poached lobster, the gold-flake desserts. Each bite they took was another piece of my lake house. Every sip of champagne was another drop of my stolen legacy. I sat quietly nodding when spoken to, but my mind was fixed on what was to come. Then it happened. During the toasts, my father stood raising his glass high. To my beautiful daughter Vanessa and her wonderful new husband James, he declared, "Your mother and I could not be prouder. We have spared no expense to make this day perfect because you deserve nothing but the best." The crowd erupted in applause. I stared at him, my lip twitching with the memory of his hand striking me, his voice demanding I sign away what was mine. Next came the maid of honor's speech, full of flowery praise. Then James's best man cracked jokes that made the audience laugh. Finally, Vanessa herself, glowing from champagne and attention, stood and faced the crowd. "I want to thank everyone who made this day possible," she said, her voice dripping with emotion that felt rehearsed. "My amazing parents who gave me everything I ever wanted, my wonderful new husband who I love more than anything, And my sister Olivia, who made the biggest sacrifice of all. She turned her gaze toward me, eyes glittering with triumph. I know how much the lake house meant to you, Olivia, and the fact that you were willing to let it go for my special day means more than I can ever say. The ballroom erupted into applause. Dozens of faces turned toward me, smiling, clapping, expecting me to nod along with this narrative, this lie. My heart pounded rage, searing through me, but my face betrayed nothing. I raised my glass slightly, smiled coldly, and said, "Check your mail tomorrow." For a heartbeat, silence hung in the air. My parents' faces froze, their smiles faltering just enough for me to see panic flicker behind their eyes. Then the music swelled again, and the guests oblivious laughed and cheered, misinterpreting my words as some charming joke. Inside, though, my parents knew. Something was coming, something they could not stop. The rest of the evening unfolded like a grotesque theater. The first dance, the cutting of the cake, the sparkler send-off, all staged rituals designed to display perfection. I watched from the sidelines, my glass of champagne, untouched, my smile fixed in place. People congratulated me for being such a generous sister, for sacrificing so much. I nodded, murmuring vague replies, my anger simmering quietly beneath the surface. Near midnight, as the band played and the dance floor overflowed, my parents cornered me near the dessert table. My mother's words slurred slightly from too much wine. "You have been quiet all day, Olivia. Are you not having a good time?" "It is a beautiful wedding," I replied evenly. "The best money could buy," my father added with a wink. "Or should I say, the best lake house could buy?" He chuckled at his own cruelty. My mother squeezed my arm. "We never properly thanked you for understanding about the house. It really was the only way to give Vanessa what she deserved." I looked at them both, these people who had raised me, who had betrayed me, who had struck me until I bled and then stolen what was mine. A calmness settled over me. "You should check your mail tomorrow," I repeated softly with a small smile, their brows furrowed, confusion flickering. "What?" Why, my father asked. "Just some information I think you will find interesting." "Enjoy the rest of the evening," I said, turning away. For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. They had no idea what was about to descend upon them. The morning after the wedding, sunlight streamed through my apartment window as I sat with a cup of coffee, calm in a way I had not felt in months. At precisely 9 o'clock, a courier knocked at my parents' front door, handing them a thick envelope prepared by Rachel. Inside was every piece of evidence we had gathered, the forged documents, the affidavit from the notary. Dorothy's signed statement, the bank records showing deposits and withdrawals that matched Vanessa's wedding expenses. Alongside it was a formal legal notice that proceedings were being filed to void the fraudulent sale and seek restitution. Simultaneously, I sent the email I had drafted weeks earlier. It carried the same evidence and my personal letter reminding them that what they had done was not just illegal, but a profound betrayal of trust. My phone began buzzing almost immediately. First my father called, then my mother, then both again in frantic succession. I let each call go to voicemail. By mid-morning, text messages poured in. "What is this, Olivia? Call us immediately," my father wrote. "There has been a misunderstanding," my mother pleaded. "Please do not do this to us, to your sister." I ignored them all. By noon, extended relatives began calling as well, clearly already pulled into the narrative my parents were trying to spin. But the evidence I had unleashed spoke louder than any excuses they could invent. That evening, Rachel called me. "They want a meeting," she said, "a family discussion." I agreed, but only if you are there with me. The next day, I walked into my parents' living room with Rachel at my side, a laptop tucked under my arm. Waiting for us were my mother and father, Vanessa and James, and even my uncle and aunt, clearly summoned as reinforcements. My father's face twisted when he saw Rachel. "Who is this?" "This is family business." I met his glare without flinching. "This is my attorney. She goes wherever I go when it comes to this matter." My mother's voice rose. "We do not need lawyers, Olivia. We can work this out as a family." I shook my head. "That ended when you forged my name." The room fell silent. Vanessa sat on the couch, pale and trembling, her mascara smudged from crying. James stood stiffly behind her, arms crossed. My aunt and uncle looked confused, uncertain, caught between loyalty and shock. My father tried again. "Olivia, we thought we had your implicit consent. We did it for Vanessa, for the family." "Implicit consent," I shot back. "You struck me until I bled. You shoved papers in my face. When I refused, you forged my name. You stole what was not yours. You laughed in public as if it were a gift." "Which part of that sounds like consent?" My mother's voice cracked. "We were going to pay you back, with what I demanded, with lies, with silence. Or were you just hoping I would never find out?" Their silence was all the answer I needed. I opened my laptop and connected it to the television. For the next half hour, I laid out everything. The forged documents side by side with samples of my real signature. The notary's affidavit. Dorothy's statement about overhearing their plan. The bank records showing $375,000 deposited into their account, followed by massive withdrawals that matched Vanessa's dress, the honeymoon, the ice sculptures. With each slide, the room grew colder. By the end, Vanessa was sobbing openly. James's face had gone ashen, and my aunt and uncle looked horrified. I turned to my parents, my voice steady and sharp. "You did not just steal my house. You slapped me, you broke me, and then you mocked me. Now it is your turn to bleed." Not with fists, but in court. Their faces crumpled under the weight of truth. There was no escape left, no narrative strong enough to erase the evidence now hanging in the air between us. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal motions, court filings, and tense phone calls, but beneath the chaos ran a steady current of vindication. For once, I was no longer the silent daughter, the overlooked sister. I was the one holding the truth, and the law was on my side. Rachel filed an emergency injunction to freeze any further financial movement from the fraudulent sale. Within days, the court ordered that the lake house remain in legal limbo until the case was resolved. My parents panicked. They had counted on the money being untouchable already, funneling most of it into Vanessa's wedding spectacle. But now they were forced to confront reality. At the first hearing, the judge listened as Rachel laid out the evidence. The forged deed, the fraudulent notarization, the sworn statements from witnesses, the bank records, all of it stacked like bricks in a wall they could not climb. My parents sat at the defense table, their faces pale, their shoulders slumped. For the first time in my life, I saw them small, stripped of control. The Johnsons, the couple who had purchased the lake house, were there as well, and though they were angry and hurt, their eyes were kind when they met mine. They understood I had been a victim too. The judge's words were decisive. The sale was invalid. A forged signature cannot transfer ownership. The property remains legally with Olivia Carter. My breath caught tears stinging my eyes. After months of despair and humiliation, the lake house was mine again, not just in spirit, but on paper. Yet the ruling did not end there. The Johnsons had to be compensated for their losses, and my parents were ordered to repay not only the sale price, but also damages fees and costs. It was a financial blow that would take them years to recover from. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Word of the scandal had leaked whispers of fraud and betrayal, making it into the local press. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward. I declined interviews, but the image of my parents shuffling out of the courthouse, heads down, spread quickly. Their reputation, once polished in their community, lay in ruins. At home that night, I stood at my window overlooking the city and let myself feel it all, the grief, the rage, the justice, the hollow victory. I had won, but at the cost of family ties that could never be repaired. In the weeks after the fallout deepened, my parents liquidated investments and mortgaged their home to pay restitution. They avoided criminal charges only because the district attorney, persuaded by Rachel and my own wishes, agreed to a plea arrangement that involved financial repayment, community service, and mandatory counseling. Still, the shame clung to them like smoke. At family gatherings, relatives whispered, friends stopped calling. My parents had built their lives on appearances, and now those appearances were ashes. Vanessa, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. Her marriage to James, built on debt and delusion, quickly soured. James had stood by her at first, but the scandal tainted him too, and the pressure of financial strain grew unbearable. Their lavish honeymoon was cut short by reality. Arguments erupted, accusations flew, and within a year they were separated. Vanessa called me one night, her voice trembling. "I did not know they forged your name, Olivia. They told me you agreed. I wanted to believe them." I stayed silent, listening to the sobs of the sister who had always been handed everything. Finally, I said quietly, "Wanting to believe a lie does not make it true." She begged for forgiveness, but I offered only distance. I had no energy left to mend what she had helped to break. Slowly, I turned my focus back to the lake house. The first time I walked through its door again, the air felt heavy, almost haunted by what had happened. The walls carried echoes of betrayal, but also of Grandpa's laughter of summers, filled with sunlight and water. I set to work restoring it, sanding the floors, repainting the walls, installing new locks. Each task was more than repair, it was reclamation. Friends came to help filling the space with new energy. We built a garden in the yard, planted flowers by the dock, restored Grandpa's old canoe. The lake house became alive again, not as a stolen trophy, but as a sanctuary reborn. 6 months after the trial, I invited a few close friends and supportive relatives for a small gathering there. We sat around the fire pit Grandpa had built, roasting marshmallows, watching the sun sink over the water. My friend Sophia raised her glass. "To Olivia," she said, "who proved that standing up for yourself is not selfish but necessary." The words brought tears to my eyes. For so long I had believed my role was to sacrifice, to stay quiet, to endure. That night I realized I had broken that pattern forever. My parents continued with their court-ordered counseling, though our conversations were few and strained. They called occasionally, voices subdued, apologizing in ways that felt both genuine and inadequate. "We will never be the same," I told them once, and they nodded, eyes downcast. Perhaps they finally understood. Years passed and life moved forward. I spent weekends at the lake house, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. I created new traditions, kayaking at dawn, reading on the porch, cooking meals in the kitchen Grandpa had built. Each memory layered over the old one's healing wounds while honoring the past. 2 years later, Vanessa gave birth to a daughter. She named her Emma. When I held the baby in my arms at the hospital, I felt a complex tide of emotions: pain, hope, love, fear. "I want her to know you," Vanessa whispered. "I want her to know the lake house, to know Grandpa's legacy." I studied my sister, wondering if she truly meant it, if she had finally learned something about what matters. Perhaps, perhaps not. But I looked down at Emma and decided that the cycle of favoritism and betrayal would not touch her, not if I could help it. The lake house would be a place of refuge for the next generation, not a battlefield of greed. 3 years after the wedding, I stood again at the dock at sunset, the water golden beneath the sky. I thought of Grandpa, of his steady hands and his quiet wisdom. He had believed I would find peace here, and after everything I finally had. The lake house was not just wood and stone. It was proof that I mattered, proof that I had survived, proof that boundaries once enforced could protect even the most wounded heart. I breathed deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs. My parents had slapped me until I bled. They had stolen what was mine and mocked me in public. But in the end, I had reclaimed it all. I had stood my ground, and standing my ground had changed everything. To anyone listening now, I ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people meant to protect you? Have you ever had to fight not just for property or money, but for your right to be seen, respected, and heard? If so, I hope my story gives you courage. Family can wound you deeply, but you are not powerless. You have the right to fight back, to draw boundaries, to reclaim what is yours. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it comes at great cost, but it is worth it. Because in the end, the most important relationship you can honor is the one you have with yourself.